Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Politics and Prose at Union Market. I'm Brad Graham, the co-owner of the bookstore, along with my wife, Lissa Muscatine, who's right over there. And for both of us, it's a special pleasure for us to be here hosting a former colleague of ours, someone we've known for a while, Washington Post columnist Dana Milbank, who'll be talking. All right, I've said enough. Anyway, he'll be talking about his new book, Fools on the Hill, The Hooligans, Saboteurs, Conspiracy Theorists, and Dunces Who Burned Down the House. Now, as a former Washington Post journalist myself, I knew Dana back when he was just a standout reporter, even before he became a seasoned columnist. He arrived at the paper in 2000 after stints covering Congress and reporting from London for the Wall Street Journal and serving as a senior editor at the New Republic. I remember being impressed with his very lively writing style and his grasp of politics. And initially at the Post, he wrote about politics for the style section, then became a White House correspondent, which of course is quite a prestigious beat. But Dana was meant to be a columnist because, let's face it, his irreverence and especially his wit are irrepressible. So he made this switch to the Post's opinion page in 2005, and since then he's been applying his keen insights and comic sense to columns about the White House, Congress, Supreme Court, and political campaigns, depending on the news of the day. He's also managed to turn out 4 previous books about politics, including the best-selling The Destructionists and Homo Politicus. Nearly 2 years ago, shortly after the 2022 midterm elections, which gave Republicans narrow control of the House, Dana, as he says in the prologue of his new book, sensed that what was about to happen in the House would be worth his singular focus. And that's because a large number of, as Dana puts it, exotic characters and MAGA extremists were about to play a more prominent role in the House under a weak slate of GOP leaders. Dana figured this would produce, quote, lively material. So with the permission of his editors, Dana spent 2023 and the early months of 2024 hanging out on Capitol Hill, closely following the events there. But even Dana hadn't anticipated quite the extent of chaos, incompetence, and self-created crises that would ensue and lead to the most ineffective Congress in at least a century, maybe even more. In Fools on the Hill, he chronicles all the absurdities, outrages, and institutional breakdowns. He divides the book into 3 sections: disinformation, dysfunction, and disunion. The story he tells is both tragic and also farcical, especially the way he tells it. But just wait, he warns, if after the election this November, the MAGA crowd ends up controlling both the White House and Congress, things will only get messier. Because what happened in the House this past term, Dana writes, is what MAGA Republican governance looks like. So if you weren't worried before, worry now. Now, in conversation with Dana will be Jennifer Rubin, who's also an opinion columnist for the Post, and she hosts the podcast, Jen Rubin's Green Room. She's the author as well of Resistance, which came out about 3 years ago, about the critical role played by women in pushing back against Donald Trump. So ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dana Milbank and Jennifer Rubin.
Well, we should all thank you, I suppose, because you spent a year with them, so we didn't have to. What was your thesis going in, and were you surprised by what you found, or did it kind of bear out what you suspected when you began this journey?
Well, thank you, Jen, for agreeing to do this with me. Thank you, Brad and Alyssa, for the introduction, Brad, but also for this amazing thing you guys have created here. These guys bought Politics and Prose at a time, at least in my memory, when you didn't really know what was going to come of brick and mortar bookstores, and they've turned it into this wonderful institution. And here we are in Union Market, in this new place. So it is. It's just a wonderful thing to see, and we were just talking about. We did a little pre-order campaign, and they handle it just brilliantly. It was so successful. I'm getting a little arthritis in the hand right now, but it's really a wonderful thing you guys have done. Now let's get down to the fools. So I wrote a column back in October of 2022, and it said, "Think you know crazy? Meet the House Republican class of 22." So these guys hadn't yet won control of the House, but it looked like it was possible. And so I just went through the list of all the people who were in it. And my favorite, who didn't make it sadly, was this woman in North Carolina. And she was accused by one ex-husband of bashing his head with an alarm clock. And then that she was accused by another ex-husband of trying to run him over with the car. Also, a daughter had a restraining order against her. And then she issued this amazing tweet like, "I did not hit my ex-husband with an alarm clock." Like, you never want to repeat the allegation, but she did. And she also believed there were alien lizards in control of the United States government. And that wasn't, in fact, true until the takeover of the House. So I was like, all right, these are going to be some good characters. And there's this guy, Majewski, up in Michigan. He got hundreds of gallons of paint and painted his entire lawn into a Trump banner. And he'd made up his whole military record. And then there was just one line about this guy on Long Island named George Santos, which we knew that there was something screwy with him, but we didn't know. We had no idea who George Santos was going to turn out to be and be this magnificent gift that is still. I mean, he's going to be sentenced in February to 2 to 6 years. And I don't know if you all saw this, but I follow George Santos still. This week, when the Desposito, the congressman from New York, got in a little trouble, another bright bulb from the House Republican majority. Apparently, he put both his lover on his lover was on the government payroll, as well as the daughter of the fiance. And
they were not the same person.
They were not the same person. Right, that would have been much less controversial, but still bad. And indeed, so who comes in? But Desposito was the guy who led the ethics complaint against Santos in the House to get him out. And so there's Santos gloating with a fabulous tweet that I can't even read here, but it involves genitalia. So, but go home and read about George Santos's tweet. So I knew something good was going to happen, or bad, but good for me. And I've often writing this thing all throughout. I was like, this is a good week. It's bad for the country, it's bad for the world, but it's good for the book. So I knew that would happen, and then it turned out because there were so many of these exotic characters, as we were saying. The election, they didn't have the red wave they were supposed to have, and wound up with, I guess it was 4-seat majority at the time. It's bounced around from maybe 3 to 5, but I didn't know they'd be utterly ungovernable. Like, I didn't know that they would take over on January 3rd and immediately, like, faceplant into the wedding cake and have 15 ballots. So, and all the rest, the 15 ballots, then they kick out the speaker, then they shut the House down for 22 days to get another speaker, then they try to kick that speaker out, and the Democrats save him. Then they try to impeach Biden for 18 months, but one of the whistleblowers is indicted for working with Russian intelligence, and the other guy's on the lam, he's working with the Chinese, and yet another one has defected to Russia. So we couldn't have known all that was going to be there, but we did know that it probably wasn't going to go extremely well. And Nancy Pelosi had a 5-seat majority as well, but she didn't have this sort of essential mass of crazy.
Exactly.
That's why she was able to do that. So that was the genesis of it, and I'm glad it worked out this way for me, if not for all of us. Yeah.
So, growing up, and until about, 15 years ago, there were grown-ups who ran for office and populated Congress. What happened? How did we go from that? And granted, there were some crooks and some screwballs along the way, but how did we go from that to where we are?
It is the essential question, because therein is the answer to how to get out of this mess. So my answer is I don't know. No, but I have some clues as to how. Right, I have no idea. Sorry, people, go home. But we have some clues as to how we got here. There have always been exotic characters in American politics, and I enjoyed writing about them over the years. There was Dollar Bill Jefferson, the guy who put all the money in his freezer and aluminum foil. There was Duke Cunningham, who actually wrote up a bribe list. He said, well, if you want this government contract, you've got to buy me a yacht, and it went down the line like that. So. But that is the difference, is that there is no counterweight of grown-ups. There still was that when, as recently as 2010, the Tea Party came in. They had a lot of nutty characters, but, John Boehner, at least for a few years, was sort of able to hold it together and push back against what he called the crazy caucus. Right. And then Paul Ryan tried to do the same thing, not as sincerely and not with as much success. But I think what's happened, it was happening before the Trump era. I wrote about this in the Destructionists. But Trump accelerated the trend, and of Trump-like MAGA characters coming in. But I think the real root of it is something structural, and that is Tom Massey, Republican from Kentucky, House Republican, is in the book and explains it pretty well, I think. I mean, he's one of the really nutty guys who's part of the burn it down crowd, and he wears, instead of a pocket protector, is a little debt clock. So he's a real true believer. And when he got was elected, he's like, well, what is it that the Republican primary voter is looking for? He said he was a libertarian. He thought maybe they want the libertarian characters, and then he said he finally figured out it's no, they are voting for the craziest son of a bitch in the race, and that's the problem. And I don't. Maybe you have you study this quite a bit, Jen. I think so you may be able to expand on it, but. In the Republican, look, almost all the seats in the House are safe seats, right? A couple of dozen maybe are in play. So the only way you really lose an election is you lose in the primary. And that's true Democrats and Republicans as well. The difference is there are sort of twice as many on the far right, or, who identify that way in the Republican Party as there are people who identify in the far left in the Democratic Party. So in the Democratic Party, there's a lot of pressure to moderate. In fact, that's why you see a Cory Bush lose, Jamal Bowman lose. But what's happened in the Republican Party is, in a primary, there may only be a few tens of thousands of people voting, and these are the extremists. So, what they're doing by being out there and extreme is totally rational. They're appealing to the people who elect them, and that's not the people in the general election. Now, Jen has been through this quite a bit in a personal way too. So, is that?
I think that's right. I think gerrymandering. I think money. I think the rise of Fox News has kind of created all the wrong incentives for these folks. By the way, your next book, you might consider doing New York City government.
If there still is one.
Yes, exactly. You know, their sort of chain of authority there kind of looks like the same chain of authority for Hezbollah now. It's on, gone, gone, gone.
Yes.
So the question I get a lot, I'm sure you get it, is, okay, these people went to college, they had enough common sense or wherewithal to raise money to run for office. Are they dumb or are they malicious? Do they believe their stuff or are they just putting on the show because that's what the public wants?
Another important question that gets at the heart of things, and there is this tension between, is it a slightly different version of that? Is it malice or incompetence? And I'll tell you the truth, the longer I've covered these guys, I actually am more likely to give them the benefit of the doubt that it's incompetence. That often you think you're looking for a nefarious explanation. It's, they just absolutely can't get their act together. So, look, from my point of view, that's a very good thing, given what the actual agenda is. In the book, I go through a lot of, the things that they actually tried to do. We call them poison pills because they were things inserted into legislation that they knew was never going to get through the Democratic Senate, was never going to be signed by the president. But there was, I think it was something like 187 members of the Republican caucus are on record voting for to abolish the Department of Education. So forget about Project 2025. They've already voted to do this. It's not like theoretical. Similar majorities have voted to restore the names of Confederate generals on military bases. A majority of them are on record supporting a nationwide ban on abortion. It's straight on down the line. Efforts to hobble the military. A majority are opposed to funding the war in Ukraine. So, from my point of view, it's terrific that this has been the most dysfunctional Congress. And now we actually have a number. We can say almost certainly this is the do-nothingest Congress since the one of 1859, 1860. Now, clever historians will know what was going on around then. So they had an excuse, at least. It's not clear what these guys can say for themselves. But no, there's a political scientist at the University of Illinois who's looked at the productivity of every Congress and, there were 70 pieces of legislation enacted into law through July, first 18 months of this Congress. And I think they've only passed another dozen in the 3 months since then. So we are virtually certain of going back at least 165 years, possibly longer, to find a Congress that actually produced less. When the nation's economy was just a tiny fraction of the size.
Now, they have addressed very important issues. Gas stoves,
Yes.
for example.
Yeah.
They have this predilection for finding things that are minuscule and not even problems. Why do they do that? Why do they go so small and make such a big deal out of nothing?
Well, Jen, I think you're being unfair because not only did they pass the Gas Stove Protection Act, they also passed the Refrigerator Freedom Act, for example.
Appliances had a good year.
Yeah, no, and there was a Dishwasher Act as well. I don't recall what the name was, but they did it so the acronym was spelled out SUDS. So they were able to get all those through the House, but there was a time when they couldn't even get the gas stoves bill through the House because some of these Looney Tunes in the House Freedom Caucus were mad that Kevin McCarthy back then had struck a deal I guess it was to avoid the debt default at that point. So they actually wouldn't approve the rule. It's a procedural vote, and it's kind of like tying your shoes in the morning. It's just like these rules always pass because the party always votes for it. In fact, in the previous 20 years before these guys came in, a rule had not failed a single time. And now it has failed 7 times in this Congress, and still counting. So I mean, those were important pieces of legislation that were passed. And I have, I mean, it's been a delight watching these guys, because it's not just the the zany pieces of legislation, but I mean, they've gotten in fistfights in the Capitol basement, lunging at each other in caucus meetings. They've been screaming obscenities at the President of the United States on the floor during the State of the Union address. They've investigated space aliens, and they brought in a witness who says that the deep state has been conspiring for 100 years to conceal the existence of said aliens. Apparently, they've been working along with Mussolini and the Vatican. So the deep state has been at this for a while, like longer than we realize. You had Lauren Boebert, attacking D.C. Politicians for legalizing public urination, which they hadn't in fact done, but she just tore into them for what she thought had happened. Now, this was before the incident we all remember with Beetlejuice, with the vaping and groping incident. But so she was wonderful. Marjorie Taylor Greene is sort of my guilty pleasure. But she called Boebert a little bitch because she stole the impeachment, the Biden impeachment resolution from her. But to give Marjorie Taylor Greene credit, she was the one who actually succeeded in getting Alejandro Mayorkas impeached, the first cabinet secretary impeached in like 150 years. All kinds of historic firsts here. But she was able to do that, and she said that he had committed indictable offenses. Which raises the possibility that Congresswoman Jewish space lasers was not aware of what an indictable offense is. And in fairness, she had already had the Gazpacho police and and other things along those lines. So it's just all of these characters together. It was such a gift, and we've only scratched the surface. But we don't want to give you too much. You've got to got to get in here. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, as I was reading this and sort of having flashbacks, I thought, gosh, if I'm having this reaction reading it, what was it like for you? Did you come away with PTSD? Did you come away with depression? Mm-hmm. What was it like as you were day after day after day following these people, then writing about them, then writing about them? Was this cause for despair?
So, yes, it was. But it's not about me. Let's be fair, and let's talk about Mike Johnson. And the quote that I start the book off with says, he says, I spend half my time, maybe I'm paraphrasing, but pretty close. I spend half my time as Speaker of the House and the other half as a mental health counselor. And if that was the Speaker of the House, I feel like, and I've remarked on this earlier, my wife, who had to deal with this at the end of each day, I'd say she is, maybe 10% of her time being a Democratic pollster and 90% being a mental health counselor to get me through to this moment. But it's a sense of, did that actually just happen today? And then the prediction would always be, well, whatever this was, it's going to be something crazier is going to happen next week. I just don't know. They're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs. You don't know what what will come next. But I bumped into Nancy Pelosi in a green room as I was doing the promotion, and she's like, "Thank you for writing this because this is how crazy it was." Yeah. And I think they have a sense that I think that maybe they felt validated since so it wasn't my imagination. It really was as crazy as this. I mean, they come into the Natural Resources Committee on the first day, and what do? Well, they make sure that every member has the right to carry a gun into the hearing room. I mean, they're not protecting lands; they're protecting their right to shoot each other, I guess. And that guns. I mean, in Victoria Spartz, another bright light from the House Republicans, was just caught with her handgun in her handbag, getting on a plane at Dulles. So it from beginning to end.
Yes, guns are a big deal. shooting guns, having Christmas cards, posing with guns. Those are all very big things.
There were also, and the lapel pins were given out by one member.
AR-15s,
Yeah,
yes.
the AR-15s. But Corey Mills did that one better, and he handed out actual grenades to celebrate his appointment to the Armed Services Committee. He sent around grenades to his colleagues, and it's a long mess. I hope you enjoy this, genuine grenade made in my district, blah, blah. And then, with an asterisk at the bottom, it says, "Oh, this is inert." but he let them get all the way down to the bottom before finding that out.
Yes. And we did go from arguably the best speaker in about 100 years, Nancy Pelosi, to Kevin McCarthy. Poor Kevin. Kevin took a lot of tries to get to be speaker, and along the way, he seemed to have given up all the powers of the speaker. Have you reached sort of a theory of what makes Kevin McCarthy tick? What motivated him to do this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Go for it.
I have, and that is what motivated Kevin McCarthy was Kevin McCarthy. I mean, it was kind of refreshing. He was really pretty upfront about it. It's like he wanted to be speaker. So he didn't care if he gave away the motion to vacate, the reason they were able to evict them. I mean, he resisted it for a while, but ultimately he was going to give them whatever he needed to give them to get the job. And as soon as he gave that away, it just basically means any member of Congress on any day can demand a vote of no confidence. So it doesn't matter. I mean, as one of I think it was Troy Nehls, a Republican from Texas, said that the Lord Jesus Christ could not govern this Congress.
Nor would he want to.
No, indeed. It's impossible because you have one dissenter can on a whim throw the whole thing into chaos. So maybe it's surprising that it didn't happen more often than it did, but it's been threatened and it's implicit, and that's why nothing can ever get done. But McCarthy's a delight to cover because obviously he has savvy and he's very good at backroom politics, but he struggles mightily with the English language. And I spent probably too many pages in here. I just love to quote him verbatim because it's just gobbledygook when you look at what came out of his mouth. And then at one point, Nancy Pelosi had called him a moron. So he thought, well, what should I do with this? Well, I'm going to make up T-shirts that say "moron" on them and sell them.
He wore them. Yes.
That didn't go particularly well. But the one I'm not really I'm no Bob Woodward. I don't want to disabuse you of any illusions here. But I don't have a lot of scoops in the sense of people don't come over and confide things in me because they'll probably get burned. But I do have one scoop in the book, and that was that Kevin McCarthy, soon after winning as Speaker, moved into the office of Speaker and had a bidet installed. And he did it in the dark of a night on a weekend so people would not see the plumbing fixture moving down the marble halls of Congress. But I think that's Kevin McCarthy there, right? It's like the comforts, it's the trappings of the office. And he'd give news conferences each week, and instead of just doing it in the TV studio, he would go different places. So, we're going to Statuary Hall today. No, now we're at the Will Rogers statue. We're going to do it right outside the Speaker's office. And then there's one when they go out onto the steps of the Capitol, and there's a new one. And I guess he doesn't know the mic is live, so he's out there with his leadership team and said, look at this great site I got for our press conference. And Elise Stefanik is like, yeah, boss, this is amazing. And Tom Emmer's like, great site, Kevin. So they were very, it was like they were in the movie of their own lives. But Kevin McCarthy was definitely, and for that joyful 10 or 11 months, he got to live his best life.
A colleague once described Kevin McCarthy as the guy in the fraternity who would always go out for beer. that he got popular by doing things for his colleagues. Well, on a more serious note, another defining feature of these people is a lot of anti-Semitism and a lot of racism. How did that come about, and how did it become sort of the norm? We just had an example of it where we had a member of Congress who repeated these vile slurs against the Haitians, and he was not brought up on any kind of charges because he preyed on it and thought better of it and then deleted his tweet. What is it about that aspect of their behavior that has so caught on and so thoroughly corrupted them?
Yeah, and the Clay Higgins, what you're referring to there, it was shocking in a sense, but if you actually go back, he's been, and I wrote about this in the book, he's been saying very similar things all along. Not only racist things, but he's sending out coded messages on Twitter to militia groups. He's saying, using military jargon to say, know your bridges, hold. So I don't know, maybe he thinks he's being funny, but it does sound like he's, urging people to be violent, or at least be prepared to be violent. So it's not at all surprising that he did that. Look, I think the defining feature of the current Republican Party is its thorough Trumpification. And that's the essence. There's the racism is, it's our original sin, and it's always a part of it, part of our politics. The parties long ago sort of aligned themselves along racial lines, beginning in the 1960s with the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act. So in a way, this is all developed from that. But, it's Donald Trump, the guy who led the birther campaign. The guy from the Central Park Five. Trump isn't, I don't think he's ideological in many ways at all. He was, I covered his campaign for Congress, for the Reform Party nomination for the presidency in 1999. He ultimately didn't wind up doing it, but he was all about universal health care and, abortion rights. And I've given to Democrats, and that Pat Buchanan, he's a racist. But I think the xenophobia and the racism, I think that is core Trump. I think that was sort of, that's what was genuine. So I think I think it was a lot of imitation. It was a lot of mini-me's. And I think what happened in 2016 is people said, hey, okay, so that can work if you really frighten a lot of people, evangelical Christians, a lot of male, white, non-college educated, many rural voters. Tell them that dark-skinned people are coming for their jobs and their lives, and I guess and apparently they're now eating their pets. You need to be scared for your life and for your job and everything else. So they saw that it worked, and I just think it's a lot of imitation of that over and over again. But great replacement theory. We used to write about it and be shocked when this would happen. Mike Johnson has voiced this in a committee room during this Congress, and right on down the line. Over in the Senate, Tommy Tuberville, saying, I don't know, what's wrong with a white nationalist? That's an American. I think it was Henry Gonzalez, a rare moderate in the House Republican Party, said, my colleagues used to wear sheets at night. Now they're wearing the sheets right out there in the daytime. That's a devastating quote, but it's probably not even the worst things. There's a lot of self-loathing going on here, but I think that's the Trump effect.
So we're going to leave plenty of time for everyone to ask questions, but as Dana and I reach the end of ours, is defeating Donald Trump enough, or are we going to need to do other things to get rid of these folks and get rid of the kind of mentality that motivates them?
It's certainly not enough. Although what we do, it's a real question of what can be done, because this situation we're in, Donald Trump didn't create it. He certainly made it worse, but things were trending in that direction for a long period of time. And what's happened is to bring it back to what we first started talking about it, is you've had round after round, election after election of these guys coming in. I write about the class of 22 was, it's the craziest since, that was the class of 20 with Marjorie Taylor Greene and Boebert. Then you go back a couple of classes to Matt Gaetz's. It's been, and the whole, the House, I think the average tenure right now is something around 3 or 4 years. These guys don't even know a world before Donald Trump. And we've lost the grown-ups, as we were talking about earlier. And anybody who would stand up to this, it's not just people retiring, although there's been a lot of that. Look at a Mike Gallagher, impressive young guy. I think he has a PhD in international affairs. He was a military veteran, went to Princeton, rising star, chairman of the committee probing China. He's out. Because he disagreed on the Mayorkas impeachment. They basically banished him. He had no future left. Ken Buck, as conservative as they come, Tea Party darling back in the day, he dared to stand up and say, guys, you got nothing on this Biden impeachment. This is silly. Gone. There's no place for him in the party anymore. Forget about a Paul Ryan or a John Boehner or a George W. Bush. Ronald Reagan wouldn't have any home here. So it'll take a long time, and I don't know how you get the poison out of the system. A huge electoral defeat could change things in a hurry, but it's just not in the cards. I just think it's a matter of people just have to hold on and try to keep what we have and withstand this for cycle after cycle until it gradually gets better.
All right. Well, it's now your turn to ask questions. So if you raise your hand, a mic will come around, and please ask your question in the form of a question.
Okay. So thank you. I guess my major question is, how did we get into this mess? Because when you look at the media and you look around, we can be quick to blame Donald Trump, or we can be quick to blame Republicans as a faction for causing this. But when we really think about it, the flaw in American democracy has been present for longer than that. Even if we look to the 60s, which I believe was a similar time of political turmoil, we had an assassination attempt on a president that succeeded. And then just 10 years later, we had a president resign from office because he was indicted in a scandal. And then just 20 years after that, too, another president was accused of sexual assault. So my question really is, what was the flaw in American democracy, or what is the flaw in American democracy, and how do we fix that going forward as a country?
Well, I mean, look, I don't think we actually had American democracy until the 1960s. We had a country where basically it was white people, and for most of that history, white men voting. So I don't think we really can look at America being a true democracy until we go back to until we start in the 1960s. You at the beginning you talked about the media effect, and it's easy to blame the media, but the fragmentation of the media and the sorting of I think that's hugely important. You talked earlier on about the Fox News effect, which I opened the book talking about some of the Fox News effect. I don't know if you've noticed this, Jen, but when I started out writing this column, I was reaching people on the left and people on the right. It is my impression that I am not, except for a few hate readers, am not reaching people on the right. I don't think anybody on the right's reading anything in the entire Washington Post, as best I could tell, or the New York Times, or watching CNN or any of the networks. I think they've basically been able to create an entirely siloed existence for MAGA America, where it's just impervious. It doesn't matter what we say. It doesn't matter what the facts are. So I think that's at also at the core of what's wrong with us right now.
So just to pick up on the question, who's leading this train? I sometimes feel like as the voters are coming out of the booth, I want to take them by the lapels and say, what were you thinking? Is this what you want? Is this what Americans want?
Right. Well, in many cases, it's not the voter, because it's, as we were talking about earlier, in the case of the House Republicans, many of these guys are being elected by a very tiny subset, just a few 100,000 people. I mean, there's a study that I cited in here, a few 100,000 people are basically responsible for the dozen most obstructive members of the House Republican Party. So it's not right. I mean, I think I blame the media before I'd blame the voters. And of course, I mean, what 70 million or whatever people voted for Trump. Probably many more, but it was stolen.
Exactly, and all the illegal immigrants, of course, were voting for him too.
But I don't really blame them either. I think they've been frightened.
All right. Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about racism and anti-Semitism, and one thing I would say is, with the sheets, they don't need to wear them anymore. It's not that they're wearing in the daytime. They just don't need to wear them anymore. But with this campaign, what's really come out to me is a breathtaking level of misogyny that I hadn't really, I guess, paid attention to that much before. So is this like the third plank in their campaign, is racism's, anti-Semitism and women should be, back in the kitchen kind of thing?
That's certainly something that's happened in the presidential campaign. I haven't really thought about it in the context of the book. That was not something I was picking up a lot of in here. I think, talking about the Dobbs decision in here and in the context of abortion, that's certainly an element of what's going on in the House right now. But I don't think what you're talking about really happened until the cat ladies. I think it just exploded onto, look, there was a lot of underlying anxiety about Dobbs, and a lot of anger. So I think that was waiting, and already, at that point, the gender gap was already, this huge chasm. But I definitely think that we have J.D. Vance and a few others. Who's the fellow in Ohio? Moreno,
right.
And a few others who have just presented this. I don't know. I guess it's. I assume they meant it as a gift to the Democrats. But,
I do wonder what happens when they go home at night. Yes.
Excuse me. Sorry, didn't mean to talk so loud. I'm not a historian, but my understanding of our history is that one of the things that's sustained us over the decades and centuries is our ability to compromise and find ways to resolve our differences without resorting to revolution and on and on. In your book, The Destructionists, you date the crack-up of the Republican Party to basically the beginning of Newt Gingrich's time at the head of the party. And these are Republicans who don't seem to believe in compromise. They seem to think of compromise as defeat and something shameful. And I wonder if what your thoughts are on that possible relationship between their problem with compromise and the fact that they're really they're not doing so well.
Right. Yeah, I mean, not only is, I would say, are they opposed to compromise, but I'm going back, this is the Congress before this one, when the infrastructure bill was passed, and Marjorie Taylor Greene went after, I don't know, a dozen or so House Republican colleagues who supported it and accused them of treason. A capital crime against the United States for supporting an infrastructure bill. And of course, the postscript to all of this is these same guys have been running around taking credit for the infrastructure bill. They've literally showed up at events and they're celebrating all the money that came to the district despite their votes against it. But yeah, that I do trace back to the warfare that Newt Gingrich started. But it's really gone beyond that. We're seeing it a bit now. It's back in the debate a bit with the filibuster in the Senate. And I've always thought it would be a terrible idea to get rid of the filibuster because a filibuster forces compromise. But I have to say, I maybe need to revisit the argument because it's not forcing compromise. Nothing's happening. I mean, they were able to come up with a border security bill. So I suppose it did that. They're able to do better on appropriations because of it. But the border security bill is another terrific example. Poor James Lankford negotiated that, and I mean, I don't know. He may well be on his way to the path of Mike Gallagher. and Ken Buck, because he dared to say, hey, wait, this would actually be good for the country.
All right. Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious in terms of individuals like Liz Cheney comes out and says, hey, you know, there's something specifically wrong with our party, and we need to do something. And as a result, she potentially convinced her father, or maybe her father also abided with her and said, you know what, I'm going to come out and say there's something wrong with our party. I'm just kind of curious why other Republicans, significant statesmen Republicans, haven't joined that train. What about Mitt Romney? Why hasn't he come out and said something? What about President George W. Bush? What about Paul Ryan, as you mentioned? Where are these people, and why have they been so quiet?
They sort of tiptoe up there. So we had Alberto Gonzalez recently came out. It's like, oh, there we go. It's a few years late, but or John Bolton. I mean, not exactly profiles in courage. I mean, better late than never, I suppose. I do talk to a lot of the people I used to write about, covering the Bush White House these days, and I bet the vast majority of them are never Trumpers. And I was like, remind me what we were all fighting about. Like, okay, well, the Iraq War, that was pretty bad, but and tax cuts. But at least the fights were about what go to war or not to go to war. It wasn't about let's put the Confederates names back on the military bases. But even when people announce their retirement, they tend not to. And I think it's because our politics is so tribal that it's not only that you'll get voted out of office, you'll lose your friends and you lose your influence, and you're essentially banished. Jen, you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. I think people hover around for forever, hoping to be relevant again one day. Why haven't we heard from Condi Rice? You point out George W. Bush. Maybe we should send out a posse to find out where he is, because he has been silent. So yes, I mean, I think it's those things. It's the desire for relevance. And I think there's a fear factor. Mitt Romney said the other day he was afraid to do this because he has family. That would seem to be a pretty good reason to come out against somebody who makes you afraid of your family. But I think all those things are at play. Yeah.
Hi, I read both of you regularly, Dana, so I can laugh out loud while I'm reading, and Jennifer, because you are the most prolific writer I've ever seen. You're the one person who has like 2 columns a day, so thank you very much.
She's making us all look bad.
She's amazing.
It's cheaper than therapy.
So I recently read Thomas Edsel's piece where he said the real Trump mystery, and he's talking about the base, the 43% of America who are Trump's base, not moving, and he's talking about how, kind of analyzing who those people are, and I have some in my own family, but basically saying that if those people actually saw, and yes, they're in the vacuum of their own news media and social media, but if they did see all of a sudden what's really happening, and that Trump, is who he is and saying the things he says, that they would have to admit that they were wrong, and it would just change everything. So my question, I'm just wondering, when Trump is gone, in the next 10 years. No, well, not that he's going to, hopefully he won't be around here. But I don't really see anyone with the charisma or the gall or the whatever it is to carry MAGA past his ending. And how are these people going to kind of come out of this?
You don't think Eric Trump is up to it?
So do you think that the MAGA movement will outpace them? And to your point, people don't like to admit that they were snookered. I'm reminded of a cult group that predicted the end of the world was coming. The end of the world was coming. Well, when the world didn't come to an end, rather than admit they were wrong, they said, well, we just calculated incorrectly. because admitting that you've been duped is kind of a self-destructive act. So do they come clean at some point, or they just keep going?
No, I don't think so. Maybe I thought so after 2016, but no, there's no reckoning, there's no acknowledgement, and I've gotten beyond thinking like, is that's even necessary? It would be more than sufficient for things to just quietly get a bit more normal. But you know, you have to understand that Trump is, you know, he's not. I mean, he's unique in our culture, but I mean, there are strongmen like him all over the place now. So he's part of an international, you know, I mean, Putin's the obvious one, but Orban, who for whatever reason, Trump seems to think if he keeps getting a nice blurb from Orban, that's really going to help him. Modi in India, you've seen them, the right, they haven't really prevailed in Western Europe, but they've had some very strong showings there. I would say Netanyahu. And others. I mean, this is, you know, authoritarians, or at least would-be authoritarians, you know, wannabes, are on the rise, and you know, it's because of the global migration and all the other things. So, you know, when it fades in our country, it'll be fading in all these other countries. So I think there's a pendulum effect to it. But I bet Jen has written a few columns on this in just the moment I've answered that question.
There you go. Well, you know, one of the reasons that they're so desperate is the demography is working against them. White Christians are already a minority, and it's going down. You can only suppress the vote so much, and then you begin to lose elections. So if they don't do it this time, you know, they may be gone for good. Yes?
Is it at least a pleasant irony that the man who's come up with two of the choicest phrases about Trump, cultural heroin and America's Hitler, is now his vice president nominee?
I mean, it's not surprising that he's that, because you know, what is Trump like more than anything else? People who like him. So the notion that he could win over this convert, I mean, I think that's exactly what the appeal of J.D. Vance was. Although I guess this latest batch of messages that our colleagues at the Post have come up with sort of defeat that earlier argument that actually J.D. Vance still thought Trump was awful after his presidency. But anyway, I mean, you know, if a good sycophant is a good sycophant, so I think I think that was the reason for his appeal.
All right. Yes, all the way in the back. Wait for the microphone. Hang on.
How viable is the idea of a third party forming that give the traditional conservatives some ground to stand on?
Well, I had high hopes for RFK Jr. Let me down. It was the brainworm, I guess. I don't have any hope for a third party. I mean, the best thing a third party can do is they sort of exist temporarily to sort of push parties in a different direction. I mean, the system is just structured in such a way that it's basically impossible. So I don't see that being the way out. I don't think the Never Trumpers could. I mean, we could probably put them in this room. I don't think they could be a political party anymore. So. You know, a lot of them have, gone over to the Democratic Party. In fact, I hope I'm not speaking out of school, but I did get a text yesterday from Adam Kinzinger who said, "Good book."
There you go. There you go. Yes, any Republican who makes sense is now a Democrat. Yes. Bring a mic over here for the lady right here in the orange.
Hello. Sorry.
Oh, here we go. All right, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
How much does Christian nationalism to blame for their embrace, I should say Republican Party embrace of Christian nationalism to blame for the Trumpists and just the extremism within that party?
On the Christian nationalism, I mean, I couldn't really put a percentage on it. I did for the adaptation we ran for the Post. I did sort of emphasize that, and it's no real accident that Mike Johnson, I think it was a week or so after, actually becoming the speaker, he goes over to the Museum of the Bible and he actually talks to this group of state legislators who are they're unapologetic Christian nationalists, and then he goes on to say that in fact God chose him to be the Moses. So, which is weird because they're still in the Red Sea.
Yeah, exactly.
But as I said, the Lord works in mysterious ways. And he flies the Appeal to Heaven flag outside of his office. So I don't know if that's. There's so many different parts of the stew. White nationalism, Christian nationalism, economic populism. They're all a part of it. And they're all in the book. Did I mention I wrote a book? All right.
All right. This lady here in the orange, can we get a mic?
Yeah, I think that's. Oh wait, we need the microphone. The microphone. We need.
You want to repeat it was just a quick question. She asked for the prediction. She asked Jen who's going to win the election, because you don't ask me these things, because I was the guy who said Republicans in 2016 would never choose Trump, and if I got it wrong, I was going to eat my column. So then I had to sit there with Tom Sietsema eating my column in various dishes. So I'm making zero predictions, but Jen will.
Me? Me? Oh, I'm the eternal optimist. My husband, who is here, knows that. So I think we're going to make it over the finish line, but who knows?
That's a good way to end things, don't you think?
Yes, let's end on that.
Let's do that.